Welcome to OT Cyber from the plant floor up, a podcast focused on discussing the latest innovations and developments in the OT cybersecurity space. The podcast is powered by DYNICS and hosted by our CTO, Jeff Smith. Subscribe via iTunes, Spotify, or the DYNICS YouTube channel, or wherever you watch/listen to podcasts, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to OT Cyber from the plant floor up. We have a very special guest today from Interstates, David Smit, and then we also have our co-host, as always and usual, Jeff Smith, the CTO at DYNICS. Would love to start off the interview today with just kind of getting a little bit of background. First, introducing yourselves, David and Jeff, and then some background on Interstates.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me today, and be happy to talk about that. So, as mentioned, my name is Dave Smit with Interstates here. I've been here for just about 8 years now, and I work in our operational technology, infrastructure, and security group here. So we do a lot of support for customers, projects for customers around cybersecurity, networking, virtualization, anything having to do with the plant floor networks or technologies. Our group does. Interstates is also much broader than that, right? We have about 1,100 employees across what I'll call the breadbasket of the United States, and we also have employees over in Germany. But we also do anything from electrical design to construction to automation to analytics. And so we as a systems integrator really try to cover a large variety of things, and I'm just part of our small subset of OT group.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that awesome introduction, and also congratulations on 8 years. That is great. So in regards to kind of the partnership, and Jeff, if you want to touch on this as well, Interstates is a system integrator of DYNICS, and we work with them on a variety of different initiatives. So I would love for both of you to highlight what that is and go from there.
Sure. Thanks, Jen. Yeah, I mean, we've had a partnership with Interstates for a number of years now. As Dave mentioned, they have a wide array of services they offer, and really from DYNICS, we're not a services organization, we're a product organization. So having key partners like Interstates is critical to our business because we come up with what I consider some pretty great stuff, but without having an arm that's skilled, knowledgeable, understands plant floor, understands technology, understands cybersecurity, understands networking, it's very difficult to get those products out. And that's where Interstates really shines. Their services organization does a great job with that.
Yeah, and I think from our side, it's been a great relationship as well. Interstates and DYNICS also are a little bit in different market sets, right? So we do a lot of consumer product goods, value-added ag, wastewater, food and bev type of industries, and DYNICS brings us some other perspectives from some of their automotive clients and different industries as well. So we really are able to use that as kind of a collaboration to kind of understand what's really going on in the industry as a whole and work better together, right? We've used DYNICS a lot to help us do some of our own initiatives as well. DYNICS has helped us build out some hardware platforms for different tools and different solutions that we want to do. And so it's just been a really good working relationship as we go, and as cybersecurity evolves, to have this relationship together has been great.
Awesome. I love that, better together. Great terminology, and to describe what the partnership really is. And so kind of thinking about the overall state of the industrial and cybersecurity industry, just thinking just to kind of explain why this partnership is so important at a higher level, and then also just if you wanted to touch on current events and what the future holds, that would be great.
Shaming?
Sure, Jeff, take it away. Start, and then David can chime in.
Yeah, I mean, current events hasn't really changed much in the last, I don't know, a little while. It seems like there's just a lot of more of the same. I think the one topic that seems to be hot on everybody's mind, which it's pretty interesting, is zero trust. And it seems like there's a lot of conversation around what zero trust is. I started a post commentary on LinkedIn the other day, and really was playing a little bit of devil's advocate, trying to poke a few bears and talking about, what is zero trust. And it's interesting, the several answers that came through is, in one case it's trust nothing, don't trust any protocol, don't trust any device, don't trust any network, don't trust any cable, don't trust anything, any piece of software. And the 180 degrees out from that, the other answer is, it'll never work. You can't not trust something at some point. We're technologically incapable of true zero trust. And I tend to lean towards that. Zero trust is an objective, it's a goal, but it's not achievable at 100%. I mean, it's like cybersecurity, right? If you can get 80% of the way where you want to be, you're doing better than 100% of the people out there, or 90% of the people out there. So zero trust, my take is it's really not, it's not achievable. It's a goal, it's an objective, but something as simple as, if you don't trust every protocol, when something powers up and connects to the network, the first thing it does is issue a ARP, and it can't do anything on the network. You can't take the first steps in understanding what that device is to know if it's even trustworthy or have been trusted or anything about it. So to say, zero trust is trust no protocol, that means ARP isn't allowed. And if ARP isn't allowed, you're getting nowhere. So that for me is a great example of how technology today really eliminates or prevents us from hitting that zero trust. So it becomes more of a goal or of an objective as it is an absolute. That's my take.
Yeah, and Jeff, it's really interesting, right? Because zero trust is a really big buzzword right now. Everybody's talking about zero trust, but nobody really wants to do zero trust because it's really hard to even think about doing that to 100%, like you said, right? I think of some other examples where, those of you familiar with the IEC 62443 standards, right, where you start talking about zones and conduits, and what can you do for best practices to allow trusted devices to communicate to each other. And the thing about it is, in the OT environment, there's always exceptions to that, right? Don't have the technology or the capability to deal with some of these newer technologies that are coming along. And so I agree with Jeff. I think it's a nice goal to have, but I don't think you're going to ever get to zero trust. You might get to don't trust most, right? But to get to true zero in the OT industry, I think is going to be a very big challenge.
It is. And I mean, to your point, people can probably get closer to zero trust in an IT or an enterprise environment, but it's exponentially more expensive to get that point. And it's exponentially more complex to manage. It's, most OT organizations, most plant floors don't have people sitting around waiting for priority tickets to come into the IT help desk to solve problems. It's they're up doing a lot of other things. They're fixing robots, they're doing touch points, they're setting up welders, they're logged into PLCs, they're adding buttons to HMIs, they're fixing servo problems. So they just don't have the luxury of being able to support some of these more complicated solutions that get you towards zero trust. Which is one of the reasons that I know Dave is as well. We're both big fans of software-defined networking in the OT space, because it is a technology gets us much closer to that than a lot of the other solutions that have ever done or gone onto the plant floor, but simultaneously eliminates a lot of the complexity, because you let the technology itself do most of the management and the automation just based on limited input from plant floor guys. So that's for me, that's a great step in that direction. But yeah, it's zero trust on the plant floor to implement it. I mean, think about ACLs on switches and the software to manage that and interface with that. And one of our big customers tried to go down the road a couple of years ago with, a couple of big companies that said, oh yeah, we can do ACL control of your Belden switches, for example. And they spent 2 years building out a solution, and by the time they were done, it was so complicated. Our customer said, "Yeah, it works, but we can't do that. We simply don't have the capability to implement, manage, and maintain that type of complexity in a system."
Yeah, Jeff, and you mentioned SDN, right? We've partnered together on some SDN solutions going forward, and I think tools like that, right, where we start talking about software-defined networking in OT and other technologies going down that path allow us to get closer to zero trust, of course, right? But there's also, I see a lot of customers who probably have a lot bigger issues to deal with, than really worrying about zero trust, right? They, they have firewalls that have wide open rules. They have all of these little incremental steps that can get them on the journey towards zero trust without really focusing too much on the zero trust buzzword, right? And so I think that's really important to remember is what can we do on our path to get there? Because it's real, right? This whole security culture and the state of the industry, it's real, right? Rockwell just posted some new vulnerabilities last week that affect probably thousands of devices that we have. You think of a 1756 ENBT card. How many of those are in the world today, right? And so it's real, right? We look at we're in the grains industry as well pretty heavily, right? And just last year alone in the grains industry, they had $98 billion in ransomware. So it's here, it's real, but I think we really just need to focus on what's achievable and what's attainable and how can we at least make steps, right? I too often see people get tied up in zero trust or whatever buzzword you may be, and it paralyzes them, right? Because it's such a big task to even try to think about that they don't do anything essentially, right?
Yeah, it's fear paralysis, and a lot of that. I can't tell you how many times. So when I was an end user for 25 years, we would get dictates or mandates from upper management, and they didn't even know what was involved in it. They used to joke. I was going to get a bumper sticker that said, "I got to get me some of that Industry 4.0 stuff," because mandates would come down from management and say, "What are we doing in Industry 4.0? How are we exploring that?" Well, that crosses about 500 different potential lanes, and it's a really wide swath of ideas relative to IIoT and Industry 4.0. So, I can't get hung up on Industry 4.0 because I'll never get a solution or I'll never have an answer. So it's kind of the same thing. It's funny. I've got a good friend of mine who owns a networking services company way out of the area. So it's not even somebody that it would be in the interstate space or any of our other partners. They're down in Texas, and he gave me a quote, and it was basically. Over the past 14 years, we've assisted customers taking the first steps towards organizing their networks. Often it involves moving from a flat, unmanaged network to one that is segmented into VLANs and equipped with managed switches. And in about 20% of those cases, we're also able to deploy a basic firewall. And the interesting thing is he went on to say, he said, however, once the initial work's completed, most customers are pretty happy with just having a layered free switch for VLAN routing. And when we ask them if they'd like to implement additional restrictions and constraints such as access control lists to control communications between people and VLANs. And he says they typically thank us for improving the robustness of their network, but decline further assistance, right? So they've checked the box, and they're afraid to do anything more because A, they don't understand it, and B, they're afraid of what that means from a cost and complexity perspective. So
yeah, that's really interesting, Jeff, right? Because, we've started to see other customers and actually even in Interstates internally as well, right? Cyber insurance is the big thing today, right? So everybody wants to get cybersecurity insurance. And a lot of these things are box checkers on a cybersecurity insurance application, right? So if you do this, you can check the box that says you've done something, right? And so we're starting to see more of that as well, where they're just doing it to check the box. And it's also interesting, right? You talk about cost and complexity. I think a lot of times, when we look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, yeah, of course, I can tell you what you should do and what's going to be the most secure solution. But when it comes down to running your business, we all know that in manufacturing or operational technology sectors that making product is king. So it's hard to get people to spend money if it's not really going to make them more product, right? Or if it's going to take their line technician another 10 minutes to do the task. That's a really hard sell today.
Yeah, no doubt. Although it's funny, it's funny when we look at some of this, and I'm sure you can relate to this. I don't know if you've ever looked at it from this angle. I chuckle when we look at some of the stuff that we're trying to promote to customers and some of the things we're trying to help them solve. And it's actually 2 or 3 levels beyond where we were 5 years ago, or even 8 or 10 years ago. And it's infinitely easier to talk to somebody about cybersecurity and OT cybersecurity than it was, 5 years ago. So it's kind of funny. It just makes me think that, the difficulty keeps changing and the bogey keeps changing, but it is easier today than it was 5 years ago. But the targets that we have to help these customers reach have changed, right, as they move. So even though it's an easier conversation, the complexity of the solutions or their need for cybersecurity is growing such that it's still a hard sell because it's a more difficult next step, right? I always tell people, if you lay out your cybersecurity plan and you can get to 80% of that plan, then you're doing awesome.
You're doing
right?
pretty good. Yep.
You've done awesome, because it's every couple of percent of that 81st to 100% is going to cost you what that first 80 did in complexity and money.
Yeah, it's interesting too, right? You look at the state of the industry today as well, and there's all these tools out there that are trying to get you to do things. And that just goes to your complexity, right? It's not a solution where you can just apply one tool and it does everything for you that you need to do from a cybersecurity perspective. Typically, you're having to layer and install multiple tools and then build up the teams to support those tools. And you're absolutely right. There's a lot of complexity there now.
Yeah. If we touch on SDN again, one of the things that, so I'm talking about it at S4, which I think you're going to S4 this year.
Yeah, I'll be at S4 in the back to heckle you a little.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I think you were going specifically so you could heckle me, but one of the things that I want to try to convey to these folks is that while software-defined networking does a tremendous and moves the ball tremendously, it's not a silver bullet, right? It's
right, exactly.
It has no facility to manage user interactions with the network. It's very device and protocol specific, and it really can't prevent Bob from doing something. As long as Bob's laptop gets on the network, Bob can do whatever he's allowed to do within the scope of a protocol that he's allowed to use. So if he's allowed to use Ethernet IP, then he could flash a PLC if he's allowed to talk to that PLC. So there's no real user context. So, to your point, there's no silver bullet. You have to try to find, the beauty is with software-defined networking is instead of having 10 solutions or 6 things to deploy or 7 pieces of software systems to deploy, that covers 65 to 70% of what these other 4 or 5 things might have done for me. And then I only have to put 1 or 2 more seams or some other, management layer on top of that to do the pieces that it doesn't do. So it really does simplify the overall solution and get you closer to the bogey. But yeah, it's complexity is a huge problem. And yeah, any of these companies just don't get, agricultural or industrial, and I laugh because when I was an end user, one of my big equipment providers for my PLCs and AHMIs sent me their first swag at a security appliance as a OT firewall, and it basically had a laptop like wall wart 120 volt power supply. It was not panel mounted or DIN mounted. It sat on 4 little rubber feet, and I sent it back to him with a picture of it duct taped to the back plane of a panel and a big orange extension cord run to it. And I said, well, when you make this industrial, let's talk about it. So, and that's still true today, even with software and IT level solutions. SDN is an example, right? We talk about that all the time. Raw SDN, like somebody would deploy at an enterprise level, it's going to fail.
It doesn't work in OT. Nope.
But if you identify those 5 or 6 gaps that SDN doesn't have an answer for out of the box, and you can address those, all of a sudden there's no reason you would not want to do that in OT. But it's the whole idea that there is not a single solution. It's, the idea of SDN doesn't necessarily a perfect fit for OT, but SDN, as long as you consider the needs of manufacturing or agriculture, food and bev, and what those people on the floor have to deal with, well, you can make the necessary adjustment to all of a sudden make it very valuable in those spaces. But too many companies don't do that.
Agree, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
It is interesting, right? Because we are in the last couple of years now seeing a big shift in IT software trying to add OT functionality into their softwares, right? And it hasn't gone great for a lot of people so far, but that's going to change, right? They're going to get better. Those softwares are going to eventually work in the OT space better.
They'll just buy enough companies that they'll get.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny you say that. I won't name the company, but a couple of years ago, just before I left my end user role in 2015, had a company come in and they were really talking up their new software that, you could do this and it would tell you all this and this and this and this, and it was all nearly real time. And they said real time. I said, really? How fast do you consider real time?
What is real time to you? Yeah.
Yeah. So the answer I got back, it made me laugh out loud. They said, 10, 15 seconds. You'll know all. I'm like, dude, that's not even nearly real time. I said, if you're going to sell software in the control space, you better be talking milliseconds.
Yep, exactly.
Microseconds. That is nearly real time.
You're in the ballpark, but that's about it at that point.
Yeah. So they kind of left with their tail between their legs, but that just goes to show that was their expectation, or coming into the OT space talking about real time in 20, 30 seconds, 15 seconds. That's not even close to nearly real time. So, like, I can't open my Excel document for an extra 20 seconds because it takes that long for the share to get opened up, and that's not going to fly in our space.
Nope, that's okay in the IT space, but when you have automation and robots and drives and servos needing to know in milliseconds, that doesn't help.
Yeah. One of my favorite examples of that was the automotive company I was with. We built machines called NVH, which is noise, vibration, and harshness. And we built powertrain components like axles, for example. And in the old GMT 800 truck lines, you'd have a 1,000-pound axle, and we would spin that with VFDs, and we would do positioning with servos, but we would spin that with, massive VFDs, and we'd spin that axle up to 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 RPM. And then we would apply drag to the quote unquote the wheels, and we could simulate drag like you were going down a hill, or you could you basically simulate all these conditions. And I used to tell people, when you have a 1,000-pound axle in that machine, and I get that it's beefy, but if you're at 5,000, 6,000 RPM and something goes sideways, it's coming out of that machine, and it's not coming out slow. You're going to watch a 1,000-pound axle make it 30 feet.
You're not stopping it. That's right.
No, there's no amount of safety that it's going to stop. You can put all the light curtains up you want, but it's not going to help you.
That's right.
So timing is critical in control in that case, and it's absolutely a requirement. So, yep. Well, there you go, Jen. That's my 30-second review on cybersecurity today.
No, this was awesome. Thank you for both sharing so much insight. I think, from the state of the buzzword zero trust, it's kind of like the really getting down to like the nitty gritty of that customized approach as well. Cause it's not like no solution fits all, if you will. So I think just coming from that perspective, particularly as Jeff, being an end user, for quite some time, I think was really helpful. So thank you both for providing that insight.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else before we call it a wrap today that either one of you wanted to share?
No, I don't think so. I think I think there's it's just an ongoing battle to fight the good fight in the OT cybersecurity space, and it's gratifying to see more and more customers understanding that they need to do something and being willing to do something. And it's, you know, it's just good to see that happen. And it's also, I think, important. And my recommendation to those customers that are trying to start down that road is ask a lot of questions. Understand what, pick the 5 things you're most concerned about. Make those 5 things your goal, and don't worry about anything else until you get to 80% of those 5 things. If you need to swap one of those 5 things out later, do it. And any vendor that comes in and doesn't ask you a lot of questions about what concerns you, what your needs are, but comes in with their solution and just wants to sell you their solution without really understanding your specific needs, find another potential partner, because they're not it. I guarantee you, when Interstates walks through the door to a potential new customer, they don't have a piece of software or a piece of hardware in their back pocket that they're going to whip out in that first meeting. The first thing they're going to do is sit down and say, okay, what keeps you up at night? What scares you about your business that if it went south or was compromised, you would potentially lose, significant IP, significant revenue, significant production, and just ask a lot of questions, because, the answer to the question, how much cybersecurity do I need, is it's different for everybody. And I love asking that question to a crowd of people, because I always get some really interesting answers. For me, the only answer to that question has always been, you need however much security is necessary to mitigate the risk you're not willing to live with. And that's going to be different customer to customer to customer.
Yep. What's your risk appetite, right?
Yep. What are you willing to live with? If you're not willing to live with something, then you've got to have a solution for it.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, Jeff. I think I would add maybe is we talked a lot about how zero trust is a buzzword and all of these things, right? We've also talked about how this problem is here and it's not going away. I will say that probably the one thing that's beneficial about having a buzzword like zero trust is at least it's now getting people talking. Jeff, you talked about this a little bit, right? Customers are starting to at least look at solutions. They're starting to think about how can we do things. They might not be able to get there yet, but at least we're able to have an intelligent conversation and engage with those and start on their cybersecurity journey.
Yeah, I think $98 million or $1 billion in ransomware is a highly motivating factor.
It is, but it's funny, like the grain industry, they had $98 billion, but they don't spend anything on cybersecurity, right? So
Yeah.
we have customers talking about it a little bit, but you throw that number out there and they're like, oh wow, that's a lot, right? Well, what are others doing? Well, there's really nobody doing anything in that industry today. So that's a big untapped industry, and they're not the only ones, right? That's like all the way across all of OT, right? There's multiple verticals with that, right?
Warehousing systems like the Amazons of the world and the Walmarts of the world, they have little to no cybersecurity. And if you were to take over and shut down those warehouses or that warehousing system, I mean, you could bring that company's sales to a halt. But they really, and I have a lot of good inside information, they really are doing not much or anything about it, which just amazes me. My Amazon guy and I know each other by first name, so the fact that I can order stuff and get it the same day, I'm ticked anymore if I have to wait a day or two.
Yeah, you think back to 2 years ago when this whole pandemic started, right? And we had all these shipping delays, and it took a week to get something from Amazon, and everybody was outraged, right? Like,
Yeah.
how can it take so long, right? And now you think about that from a security perspective, and not just the pandemic perspective, but they're a giant hole waiting to be attacked, right? And
Yep.
and that really disrupts our whole entire economy.
I know it messes with me. I Amazon guy stops at my house 3 times a day sometimes.
I want my stuff and I want it now.
That's right. Yeah. So Amazon and these guys need to get off their collective backsides and get busy working on cybersecurity so that my stuff shows up on time and they don't disrupt that. And I'm willing to help them.
Yeah, that's right. Your dog needs to keep getting his bones.
That's right. Yeah, it was a veritable parade through my office here a few minutes ago. So.
Love that. Well, thank you both so much for providing all that insight and all that jazz. And we will catch you next time on OT Cyber from the plant floor up.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Jen.
Yep. Thanks for having me.